Hey, I have a question for you. Do you have a word wall in your classroom? Chances are, if you are a first, second grade, even kindergarten teacher, you have a word wall. But if you're an upper elementary teacher or even middle or high school, it's less likely that you have a word wall in your classroom. And I want to convince you to reconsider and possibly put one up even this week. So when I taught first and second grade, I always had a word wall in my classroom, and it was ranged alphabetically, and it included all of our high frequency words. And the whole point of that in there was so my students could see those words and use them in their writing, so they would spell the words correctly, and so they would see these words more frequently and be able to recognize them in their reading. So when I moved to fourth grade, I figured I'm no longer teaching sight words. I don't need to have a word wall in my classroom, but I was wrong. Eventually, I corrected that and put up a word wall. And the reason why is regardless of what subject you teach, regardless of what grade you teach, you are a vocabulary teacher. You are teaching your students important vocabulary terms that are essential for them to learn to master that content area, not even to improve their reading, just to master that content area. If you teach math, there are so many math terms that your students need to know in order to effectively execute those math skills. If you are a science teacher, there are so many terms that your students need to know in order for them to have a solid grasp of that content. Even if you're a reading teacher, there are specific terms and strategies that students need to know to understand that content knowledge. And a word wall is such an effective tool to use to help them boost their vocabulary. Students in upper elementary are learning anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000 words a year. That is a huge number. But in order for those words to become a regular part of their like everyday knowledge and words that they can quickly access and use, they need to have exposure or engagement to those words anywhere from 8 to 10 times. That's a lot, especially considering that we already have a very full plate when it comes to our instructional load. One of the things you can do, though, to help increase that exposure to those new words is having a word wall. I like having a word wall in upper elementary because it reminds students of the terms that we are using, and it reminds you to incorporate those words into your into your everyday instruction, into your language. I think a lot of times when you're introducing terms, if you don't have it written down, students are going to forget about them. But when it's a part of the environment, they're more likely to go back and use those words. One of the whole purposes of having a word wall in upper elementary is to make those words accessible so students will use them in their writing and in their class discussions. When I had a word wall in my classroom, I would regularly use that and encourage students to use those words in their discussion. So if we were talking something about science, I would say, I want you to use 3 specific terms in your response today. If we were having a discussion about problem solving, I would tell them, I want you to use 3 of those terms in your discussion today. And if we're asking students to use terminology that is new to them and maybe a little bit uncomfortable, we want to make it as easy for them to use a risk, or to take that risk and use those terms. So if they know that they can look on a bulletin board somewhere and see what that term is and see the definition, they're more likely to feel comfortable using that word then in a discussion or in a writing. So a word wall is a great tool for you to use to get that the number of engagements that students need to internalize those words. One thing that I like to do is when I'm creating my word wall cards, this is a sample of a word wall, like of the word walls that I would display in my classroom. You want to make sure that you have the term and make it nice and large so that way students from across the room can see it. But you also want to include the definition, possibly an example if it's relevant, and then include a visual, a pictorial cue. And the reason why you do that is because then this word wall becomes accessible, or this word card becomes accessible to all your students. So if you have ELL students, using visual cues is such a great strategy. If you have students who are have learning disabilities or even reading below grade level, if you only have the text on your word wall cards, students are going to be less likely to access them. But as soon as you include that picture cue, they're more likely able to remember that word and follow through with it and use it. So a word wall in your classroom is a great strategy to use, be accessible to all students. In upper elementary, you want to arrange your word wall according to content-specific terms. So most of the time in lower elementary, everything is alphabetical because it's more for high-frequency words and for them to get access for their writing. But in upper elementary, we're using it to boost their vocabulary so they can use those terms in their writing or their class discussions. And in order for them to access them, they need to know where are all of the science terms located, where are all of the math terms located. And so rather than doing it alphabetical, you can have it alphabetical within the content, but you want to have all of your content specific terms together. So you could have one giant word wall and just have sections for here's all of the math terms, here's all the science terms, here's all the language arts terms, or you could have specific vocabulary walls that are unique to each content area. So you could have a space in your classroom where the math words are, a space in your classroom where the science words are, whatever works for your space. The important thing though is that you have a word wall in your classroom. The other thing that you want to do, and this was a mistake that I made, is I would put the word wall up and I would just expect my students to know it was there and to know how to do it. But if you are going to have a word wall in your classroom, you want to take the time to actually teach your students what it is, explain why it is there, and explain how it can help them. So make sure students know to be looking for words and to be using those in their writing. Let them know that any word you're going to post on that word wall is going to help them in the content area that you are teaching. So you want to take some time to do an actual mini lesson to explain to them what is the purpose of having those words on display in their classroom and what is their role in using the word wall. I like to use these sort of ready-made word wall cards because you can use them as a part of your introduction. So if you are introducing a new term for the first time, you could put this on your whiteboard, show it to the class during the mini lesson, and then stick it up on your word wall so students can reference it and they kind of know what they're looking for. If you don't want to get ready to print word wall cards, you can have your students make them, which is another effective tool. If you can engage your students in the actual creation of the word wall, they're going to be more likely to use it as a tool because they have some buy-in. So if you are an upper elementary class teacher and you do not yet have a word wall in your classroom, I hope that starting this week, you will start posting words in an intentional space and teaching your students how to use them, because that is going to help boost their vocabulary, but ultimately lead to their success in your content area. I'm going to go ahead and link. I have a couple different sets of word wall cards in my TPT store. So if you want just a quick way to get started, you can go ahead and grab these. I will link to them in the comments below once I end the video. And then I also put a post on my blog this week that talks a little bit more about effective ways that you can set up a word wall in your classroom. So hopefully you found this helpful and hopefully you're getting ready to post that word wall in your classroom this week. Have a good day, guys.